Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kim Sage, and we are talking all about the role that perfectionism and being what we call the self-critic, how that really shows up and affects our ability to engage in relationships, and how it acts as a saboteur, really, of our ability to experience vulnerability and closeness and connection with our partners, with our family, and others. And so this video is specifically about the role that the self-critic plays in terms of perfectionism and endangerment, and some of the most common ways we can engage in these often destructive behaviors. Not on purpose, but in ways that at our core were meant to protect us, but often keep us distant, even if we are showing up right in front of you and it seems like we're there, we're often not really there, and or we are full and true isolators in some regard. And so that is what this video is about. Before I get started though, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about the role of self-critic. Often what happens in very complex childhoods is that we don't get our love, our attention, our needs, our nurturing met. And because we struggle, because we can't really, imagine holding our caregivers responsible, it can't possibly be their fault. As we're young and developing, we often tend to believe over time that, well, it must just be me. It must be my fault. And we often become overly identified with the superego, which is like the hardcore, judgy parent part of ourselves, right? That often becomes our identity, that we often turn inward and as in the inner critic, and outward as in on to everyone else. And at the core, it acts to try to protect us. We think on some level, if I can just be perfect and get it right, then maybe this time I'll get my needs met, or this time the parent will show up for me and love me. Of course, they often are never able to meet us in that way. And so we carry this throughout life, and it acts as a way to distance us, because if at my core I'm not good enough, or like the outer critic, as I incorporate you're not good enough, then how are we ever going to be real and close and see each other? So we often get hooked into this idea of being perfect and getting it right, and then being very critical when we don't, and just driving ourselves to always do so, and also to the core of that, that no one is safe. And so what we do is we constantly project danger into everyone and every situation. It's this sort of combination of our self-hatred and our fear and our often longing to have this safe attachment that we don't. That really means that we're often walking around hyper-vigilant. We are on edge. We are scanning the environment at all times to protect ourselves. Even if it seems sort of a low-key emotional protection, I would argue that's just as significant as a physical need to protect. So we become hyper-vigilant, right? Where our nervous systems are always on guard. I mean, we all are, but ours are really on guard. And we're scanning and looking for any place of rejection or danger, either in ourselves or others, in terms of that perfectionism. And so how does that play out, and what do we do with that? So what we do is we basically become perfectionists, first of all, right? We are never enough, and neither is anyone else. And we become so hardcore on ourselves. The next thing we do is we often approach the world through a very black and white lens. It is an all or nothing dynamic. And you can see how that kind of thinking often lends to that splitting part of borderline. But it really is this way of viewing the world that we are all good or bad, things are all good or bad, and people are all good or bad. And of course, if you ask most people, they will tell you that almost all of life exists in the gray area. There is really very little true, right or wrong dynamic at the core. The next thing is we often micromanage. We become over-controllers. And the research shows, for example, with borderline kids, that they tended to be more controlling. And I think that's because when you have an out-of-control childhood or environment, you are constantly trying to find ways to be safe and regulate and all of those things. And so what happens often is that you are not able to do that, right? The world is only so controllable, and so that can become a problem. The next one is we have a lot of self-hate and self-disgust and toxic shame. And so at the core, we are just never good enough, and we are extremely harsh. Not just not enough, but we can often be abusive in how we talk to ourselves, how we think about ourselves. And it really can go into that true self-hate, where we kind of become disgusted with ourselves and where we lack any ability to have self-compassion, and that is not helpful, obviously, either. The next thing we do is we're often unfair, we often judge others harshly, and really make a lot of comparisons to ourselves and others, and especially times when we're not so great, and so it's kind of a setup for our comparison to always fail in our regard. And then we often our guilt, we let our guilt drive us. It's sort of this thing where we've always done something wrong. We can also, like I said, be self-harsh and judgmental, and so we place that guilt on you or others, where there's always this blame going on. And then we often play this, what they call, we should to death others, we should on each other, you should do this, you should do this, you should do that, as opposed to what we want to do. It's always about what we should be doing. There's no real sense of self in that. And the last one is often this excessive focus on work and productivity and workaholism. It's a doing kind of world. There's not a lot of being involved. And we use that to add another layer of trying to prevent that criticalness. If we just keep working hard enough, and we get enough success, or we find ourselves so busy we can't think about it, it's going to somehow protect us from that deeper wound and that deeper core of being self-critical. And the reality is that it's not going to. And so that creates a big problem for us. The next thing we do is we often create fear of danger and endangerment issues, right? And so the world is a very, very dangerous place. And how do we do that? We drasticize things, we catastrophize things, we're hypochondriacs, like everything is like, oh, I have a headache, I must have a tumor, right? And it's no joke. Most of us that have these kind of childhoods I think we all do this, because otherwise WebMD wouldn't be what it is and it wouldn't be such a joke in the popular culture. But the truth is that we really do. We have a hard time, slowing down the 0 to 60 process. We're always imagining the worst case scenario and then backing ourselves up to deal with it. And I think that is really one of the big hallmarks of a CPTSD childhood, is that you always tend to think, well, okay, what's the worst case scenario? And I can handle that. And then you back yourself up to sort of give yourself the strength to deal with it. The next one is we're often negatively focused on things. We're always seeing what's the worst case scenario as well, but it has this negative spin on it, right? We don't tend to go to, well, what's the good that can happen? We tend to see it through a very negative lens. The next one is we often have a significant urgency of time, right? We're just go, do, and there's never a chance to breathe and slow down. Everything has to be done at 90 miles an hour, and that acts to sort of keep us engaged in a way that prevents us from dealing with those deeper fears, but it really prevents us from being present and engaging. The last two are this sort of performance anxiety and social anxiety, where we just the lens is so deeply upon us that we can be sort of frozen and crumble with any chance to put ourselves in the light. And that really, keeps us in that worst case scenario fear of we're going to completely screw up the speech, or we're not going to get it right. And that keeps us removed from connection with ourselves and others as well. And lastly, we often have this fear that at any time others are going to come after us, they're going to attack us. The world is this negative, harsh, cold place, and we can often misperceive so many other interactions as, intentionally meant to hurt or wound us, to reinforce that narrative that at the core, as I said in the beginning, we're not good enough. It's about our lack of worthiness, and or we aren't safe or together. We're not safe and we're not enough. And so if every interaction in the world is governed by those two beliefs, then it's really hard to experience any real connection. And it makes isolating a lot more common. It makes, isolating or more passive isolating, even if we're actually in a relationship. I have to hold that wall back from myself because I'm often doing and implementing all these things I just discussed that keep us from connection. So I'll discuss more on each of those. I hope you will think about them as you start to think about isolation. If you do isolate, whether you do it in a low-key version or more obvious way. And I hope you'll consider subscribing, clicking the bell, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. Thanks for watching, guys, and please stay safe and well, and don't forget to leave your thoughts and comments, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.